we are in a cool part of our service called Christmas Q&A, where we thought it would be a fun idea to address some of the questions you and us might have about Christmas. And I think it's good to ask questions, particularly around faith, because we could just hear something and continue believing it. For example, my 10-year-old daughter and I were hanging out on Christmas Eve, and she said, "Dad, how come we don't make such a big deal about Christmas Adam? Because Adam comes before Eve." And I was like, "Oh, sweetie, I made that joke a long time ago. That's not real. Like, Eve stands for, like, the evening before." And so she would have probably I should have just let her believe that. But there are other questions out there, more important ones, that you guys even asked 2 weeks ago. And so we brought the boss man here. We have the questions ready, and we're going to let him just kind of share some of his nuggets of wisdom on us. So does that sound fun? Sweet. All right, Michael, very first question. It's my name. Where does the term Christmas come from?
Christmas is kind of a contraction because in the Roman Catholic Church, the worship services are called masses, and this one was called the Mass of Christ, or Christ's Mass. And so they just put that together, and that's why we call it Christmas.
That's a good one. Do we know the actual date or time of year that Jesus was born?
Yeah. No.
Maybe.
And that was the short answer. The longer answer, I just want to put out a disclaimer first. Please do not send me any links from, what you saw online, because everybody online knows exactly when Jesus was born. But the truth of the matter is, nobody has any idea, no matter how authoritatively they speak. We just don't know. There's a couple of ideas about when Jesus might have been born. First of all, it probably was not in 0 AD BC. The dating system was done by a very efficient monk named Dionysius Exiguus, and he just got things wrong. Jesus was probably born maybe 6, maybe 4 BC. And the reason that we put his date back there is because people are pretty sure he was born when Herod the Great was king, and most people believe that Herod died in 4 BC. So it was probably a little bit earlier than 0. Whether it was December 25th or not, hard to know. December 25th, people think it got picked because of some Roman pagan festivals, but that is definitely not true, because the Roman pagan festival that people usually peg that to wasn't really codified until the 4th century, and Christmas was already being observed before that. There is a possibility that there was something going on in what is modern-day Scandinavia, some pagan activity up in there about, the solstice and the dying and the rising of the sun, and there might be something to that, but there's no real direct link where we can say that the church decided, there's already a party, so let's baptize it and have it be our party. That's just really not historically accurate. Then there are some people who believe that that the 25th was picked. So the 25th is the Feast of the Nativity, when Jesus was being born. And some people think that December 25th was picked because March 25th is the Feast of the Annunciation, where the church celebrates the angel Gabriel coming to Mary and announcing that she was pregnant with the Son of God. And so what people did was they're like, okay, if that happened on March 25th, let's count forward 9 months. December 25th. The problem is that nobody knows which came first, the chicken or the egg, because some people think that March 25th came first, people counted forward 9 months. Other people think that Christmas came first and they counted back 9 months. So the short answer is nobody knows. I actually kind of like that we do it on December 25th because at least in the northern hemisphere, it does remind us that the light of the world comes in at a very dark time. Whether it actually was the 25th or not is really immaterial because the symbolism is still true. I just like the fact that it reminds us because it's just so dark this time of year, but nobody really knows.
Awesome. So regardless of when it actually, the first one was, it is still an important holiday for us. Why is the birth of Jesus so important to our faith? And then someone asked, shouldn't we put more emphasis on his death and resurrection instead?
Yeah, it's a great question because we're kind of trained to think about and know that the big deal is the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, because that's when God kind of effects our salvation. But Christmas and the crucifixion and the resurrection, I like to think of as kind of two sides of the same coin. They kind of each need each other. If you don't have Christmas, then the death and resurrection of Jesus doesn't really work. And if you don't have Easter, then Christmas doesn't matter at all. They're really very much tied together. And so they're both important. Whether one is more important than the other, I don't know, because I think they're part and parcel of the same act. Because the reason that Jesus' birth is important is because the only way that we could be saved is if God came and became a human being. And that's what Christmas is all about. It's not like Greek mythology where one of the gods just all of a sudden decided to pop down and become, human for a little while. And it's not like some other religious traditions where there was this human being and it just seemed like there was something special about him. In the birth of Jesus, the fully godness and the fully humanness is put together. And if we don't have fully God and fully human, then the death and resurrection don't work, because it has to be God as a human being who affects our salvation. So they're both important, but I think they're two sides of the same coin.
Another question we got in terms of why are they important is the virgin birth. Why is that a big deal?
The virgin birth is important because that's where we kind of discover and put together the whole idea of Jesus' humanity and Jesus' divinity. So there's a couple of things that happened pretty quickly after Jesus was born that made the virgin birth an important aspect that the church wanted to make sure that people understood. First, there was this, it was a heresy at the time. It was called Docetism, and it will be on the test, Docetism. It comes from the Greek word dokeo, which means to appear, and not like to show up, but just like to look like but not really be. So there was the sense that Jesus wasn't really a human being. He just appeared to be human. So it would be more like the Greek gods when Zeus decided to come down and just be among us. But it was very important that we emphasize that Jesus was fully God and fully human. So he had to actually be born and have a human parent. But he also we needed to be reminded that he was fully God. Not something where it just descended on him, or we recognize there's something unique about him. So in being born of the Holy Spirit, you get the full godness, and then in born of Mary, you have the full humanity that has come together at one point, and that's why you need to have both of them. Another thing that crept up that was pretty contemporary with the birth narratives, that was a long way of saying happened at the same time as Jesus was born, was that there was this rumor that Mary had been raped by a Roman soldier and that Jesus was the product of this rape. And so it was very important that the church made sure that people understood that that was just a rumor and that it wasn't true. So the virgin birth is important for those reasons. It puts where Jesus comes from. It helps us understand the full humanity and the full deity both at the same time.
So this next one, I didn't really recognize the difference until I went to seminary, but the virgin birth is not the same thing as the Immaculate Conception, yeah?
Yes, it is not. And you can win money at parties about this. If you're at a party and it gets a little bit slow, you can challenge somebody about this and you can win $20. Because most people think that the virgin birth and the Immaculate Conception are the same thing, but they aren't. The virgin birth has to do with Jesus. The Immaculate Conception has to do with Mary. And it's important. The Immaculate Conception also is pretty much just a Roman Catholic doctrine, not so much Protestants. But I really respect how the Roman Catholic Church does theology, because they're trying to figure this thing out. So if Jesus was fully God and fully human, but he was sinless, how can that be? Because Mary is a person, and original sin is given to all of us through our parents. It's passed along. So if Mary had original sin, and then she had Jesus, wouldn't Jesus also have the stain of original sin like the rest of us, because his mother did? And just, a little bit of a side note, the big deal about original sin is not so much that, it completely infects all of us, but that we choose to kind of participate in that stream of things. So it's not like, we're separated from God because of original sin. We're separated from God because we kind of had that propensity to go down that route, but we chose to do it ourselves. So the Immaculate Conception is a way of dealing with that. So what the Roman Catholic Church says, and this is a relatively late doctrine, I think it comes about in the 19th century, is that when Mary was conceived without sin. So she could not pass original sin on to Jesus because she was conceived immaculately. So that'll win you $20. The Immaculate Conception is about Mary. The virgin birth is about Jesus.
Thanks. Okay, let's talk about the 12 days of Christmas. Is that a real thing? We just sing about it? There's birds involved? I don't know.
Yeah. It is a real thing, and it's a real thing for a cool reason. I don't know a whole lot about the song. I mean, I know the words like you do, mostly, 5 golden rings. But the song comes later. But in the Christian calendar, most everything is about a season. And we kind of loosely observe the Christian calendar, mostly around the two big celebrations of Christmas and Easter. So you have Christmas and Easter, and each one of them is preceded by a season of preparation. So Christmas is preceded by the season of Advent, which is to give us a chance to wrap our minds around the fact that Jesus becomes a human being and lives among us. And Easter is preceded by Lent, which is to give us a chance to deal with the resurrection in our minds. But whereas in the culture, Christmas is one day, in the church, it's actually 12 days. It's a season. And that's for the reason that Advent is about anticipating Christmas, and then we have this season to actually live into the reality of Christmas. And it used to be that there's a difference between Advent carols and Christmas carols. And one time when I was at our church in New York, we decided that we would only sing Advent carols during Advent and Christmas carols during Christmas so that we could really experience the Christmas season. Well, everybody hated it because Advent, like Come Thou Long Expected Jesus is an Advent carol. They're all about this longing. They're all in minor keys. They're all super depressing. And all anybody wanted to sing was Joy to the World. But the idea is that you get 12 days to sing Joy to the World and all the big songs that we enjoy, because now it's actually in Christmas, the season. So Christmas, the season of Christmas starts on Christmas Day and it ends on Epiphany, which is the Feast of the Wise Men on January 6th. So it is a deal. I don't know that much about the song. I don't know what they represent. I don't know that it was some secret thing. That's all out there. You can't believe what it says on the internet about that. I don't know.
It's a lot of money, though.
It's a lot of money.
A lot of gifts. Okay, so living into Christmas, celebrating Jesus as being fully God and fully human, a question came up does that mean he could do miracles when he was a child?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, people have been asking that for a very long time. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, don't really say much about Jesus being a child. There's a couple of episodes that are there. One in particular makes it look like Jesus was not particularly well behaved. But other than that, it doesn't really say much. And so people have often wondered, what what happened in those, 12 years or whatever until we start hearing about Jesus. And so whenever there's a void, something steps in to fill it. And so there are a couple of writings out there, primarily the Gospel of Thomas, and the other one might be the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. I don't really remember. But the Gospel of Thomas has a lot of the infancy and childhood stories about Jesus. Now, just a word about that. How many of you saw or would be willing to admit that you saw the Da Vinci Code, which I saw and I loved it. I thought it was super great. Okay, 2 of you. I'll just talk to Bob and Sajin then. Well, the Da Vinci Code was actually fascinating, but it was completely wrong. Because the Da Vinci Code talked about how there was all these secret writings that the church was trying to suppress. Well, first of all, there are no secret writings. You can buy all of them on Amazon. You do not have to sneak into the secret Vatican archives. You can just buy them from Amazon. They're all out there. And it's not like the church was trying to suppress, the whole Mary Magdalene thing is not true, and the church wasn't trying to suppress it because it just was never true. But if you read some of these other writings, like the Gospel of Thomas, they didn't make the cut because they weren't attributed to an apostle. Jesus didn't quote it, and if you just read them together, literally, they're just not on the same level. I mean, it just is not that great a literature. So there's any number of reasons why it didn't make the 66 canonical books that we have. But the Gospel of Thomas is where you want to go if you want to find some of the stories about theoretically what Jesus did. And some of them are kind of cute and precocious, and one of them is just really, really disturbing. One of the cute ones is that when Jesus was young, he was out playing in the mud, and out of mud, he made these little sparrows. And he thought that they were so cute that he breathed onto them and they became alive and they flew off, which is cute. The disturbing one, which is pretty much at the beginning of the Gospel of Thomas, is that Jesus was out playing with some of his friends, and one of Jesus' friends annoyed Jesus, and Jesus spoke him out of existence, which is disturbing on so many levels. So nobody thinks that those things are true, but that's just kind of some of the things that are out there. But the idea of being fully God and fully human really is about Jesus putting aside everything that it means to be God. It's about entering into the limitations of being human. And Paul captures this when he quotes in Philippians chapter 2 an early hymn which says that Jesus emptied himself of everything that it meant to be God and became human like us. So Jesus goes through the same developmental stages as you did and as your children go through. Jesus doesn't have special tricks in his bag. I mean, he had what you had when you were 6 years old because he chooses to put all of what it means to be God aside and to accept the limitations of being human. And this is really important, and we shouldn't miss this thing because at the beginning of his life, God becomes weak. And God identifies with us in our weakness. And he doesn't, have this thing that helps him through it. He just slogs through it like the rest of us do. And then if you go to the other end of his life, when we get to the crucifixion particularly, Jesus also identifies with weakness. It's through the weakness and his death on the cross that the ultimate victory over sin and death is made. And I think that this is really important because I think one of the things that we are dealing with now is that we think for the church or for Christianity or the gospel to succeed that we have to attach ourselves to power. And if the church is not attached to power, then it will fail. But the beginning and the end and really the middle of Jesus' life are all about weakness and entering into poverty and the stuff of regular human existence. So, no, Jesus couldn't do miracles when he was a child.
Thanks. All right, a lot of questions about the wise men. Like, what do we know about them? How many were there? How long did it take to reach Jesus? Where did we find them? What star were they following? We would welcome all of your wise men knowledge right now.
Okay. Yeah, the wise men are a great question, and they might be, at least for my money, the most fascinating part of the nativity. So the nativity scene that you have is really just like shorthand. They just kind of lump everything in there together. But things happened at different times. So let's start at the beginning. So the wise men were not kings. The technical term for them is magi, and it's where we get our word magic from. And so they were a priestly class of people in Babylon and Persia and that whole area who were astrologers and astronomers, because back in the day there wasn't any difference between the two of them, who were very well educated and were probably the wisest people of the time. And they existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, one of the things that I like best about the Magi is that there is a pretty strong possibility that Daniel, of the lion's den and the fiery furnace fame, when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken in the Babylonian captivity from Israel to Babylon and were living in the palace of the king, they became some of the king's wise men or magi. And so one of the schools of thought is that you go to right before Jesus' birth, and all of a sudden we have these magi, and they are looking for the king of the Jews. They're watching the star. How did they find out about that? And the school of thought says Daniel told them. That when Daniel was in exile and became one of the magi, in fact, probably the chief magi, that he told them the stories of Israel's God. And it was after Daniel told them the story that they started looking for the signs. And 400 years later or so, when the sign came, the Magi had been looking because they had heard the stories from Daniel, which I think is pretty cool. How many of them were there? Have absolutely no idea. There might have been 3, there might have been 6, no idea. What were their names? Absolutely no idea. People have given them names, those are from the ether. We don't really know. How long did it take them to get there? Well, if they were Babylon-ish, 6 weeks. They traveled probably on camels, and they camped the whole way, so how fast do camels walk? It took them a long time. Where did they meet Jesus? Well, because of the time it took them to be there, it was probably post-stable. It was probably post-exile in Egypt, and they were probably living in a house somewhere. And that was probably when the Magi got there. They too, again, and I said this earlier, probably 4 BC, 6 BC, something like that, because of the Herod story there.
Okay, one more question. Whatever became of Joseph?
Nobody knows. Joseph just kind of fell off the face of the earth. He's very important at the beginning of Jesus' life, and we know that he was around for a while, but by the time we get to the crucifixion, he's not around, and it doesn't appear that he's been around for a while. So there is some tradition that talks about Joseph dying at some point, and that's just everybody's best guess, is that at some point before Jesus' ministry that Joseph dies.
Oh.
Sorry.
All right. No, okay, so thank you, Michael, for answering many of our questions. Can we give it up for Michael? Very, very smart man. Hey, questions are important to the Christian faith, and as we transition to communion, I want to take a little bit of time to really emphasize that at Harbor Covenant Church. We want you to ask questions, whether it be about Christmas or about Easter or any other part of the Christian faith, because that is how you grow. And there's two real ways that we encourage you to do that here. One is getting involved in a small group where you can be with people that you trust and go through the Bible together and ask those questions. And the other is finding a mentor that is older and wiser than you in faith, that you can trust their answers and spend some time picking their brain. Both of those two things you can do by scanning this card in the divots of your seats. It's our Next Step card, or by visiting our website, harborcove.church. And you can fill out a form, and we will get you connected to where you need to be. So continue to ask questions. We really believe in it. Thank you for participating in our Christmas Q&A.